I don't believe in coincidences, Carl. I see this as simply another play in the playbook in an attempt to diminish what I believe is the greatness of our country. You know, we've come a long way from the inspirational words of Ronald Reagan about the shining city on a hill and American exceptionalism, that belief that there was something unique about America, which I believe. The point is that we are the best form of government, and we've far exceeded in making the lives of our citizens and been an example to the entire world. That's why people are clamoring to come here, and we've benefited from immigration over the years.
Absolutely.
And all of us, you and my family both, historically, came from another place and made a life here and added to the American dream.
Hello and welcome to Along the Way Life's Journey. I'm your host, Carl Buccellato. As I've told you many times, I've traveled millions of miles around this beautiful earth of ours, and I've met some wonderful people. People who understand what's going on in life, and people who contribute to helping. And I am so fortunate to have with me today just such a man. His name is Edward Joseph Pozzuoli. And I add the Joseph in between because I have interviewed a few Edward Pozzuolis before, and I want to make sure he has a place of distinction. Ed is the CEO of Tripp Scott, a famous law firm. He is a host of his own show where he interviews notable people from all over the country, all over the world, actually. And he's keenly astute to what's going on in this world today. And we're going to have a little bit of a conversation about that. Ed, welcome to the show.
Carl, thank you for having me.
Before we get into our conversation, I would like us both to just take a moment and recognize that this is 80-year anniversary of the Normandy invasion. June 6, 1944, over 100,000 Americans stormed the beaches in Omaha Beach, many of them giving their ultimate for this country and its freedom, many dying, many being wounded, and suffered for a long, long time. In this morning's celebration in Omaha Beach, only 423 survivors were still there. Men mostly 100 years old or older, which means that the average age of the young men who stormed the beaches were 20 and 21 years old. Think about what we are raising today and think about what could be. So we'll take a moment of silence in memory of them. Lord God, thank you for their sacrifice and thank you for this great country. Okay, now we get into the realities of life as it is today. Ed, welcome to my show.
Thank you, Carl.
And I know that you're not unaccustomed to this kind of thing because you do your own show, and I watched you many times. You have the occasion of having people live in front of you, and you have a great feedback back and forth. But we're doing this on Riverside technology, which brings people together. So how does it feel being someone who is always on the flip side, asking the questions, doing all the background research, coming up with what you'd like to hear, and now you have a chance for the first time, I'm sure not the first time, you've done this many times before, but you have a chance to say what you're thinking about subjects, because we're going to be talking about some things today that are pretty radical and pretty widespread in acknowledgement in America. So how do you feel having that opportunity without constraints?
It feels great. There's always a constraint when you're interviewing somebody else, because you're trying to guide them through the discussion a little bit and keep it interesting and keep it lively. But I've been on this side before. I spent some time as a Fox contributor in some other places, and so I've been interviewed many times on many different subjects. So let's have at it, Carl.
Okay, let's do it. Let's not kid around. Let's get right to the reality of what most people are thinking of today. What about this travesty called justice, which has been trampled on? As an attorney, I'm sure you have certain feelings about what went on this week.
Well, it's interesting. We're celebrating. You had a nice moment of silence and a tribute to the 80th anniversary of D-Day, and many of those soldiers took the ultimate sacrifice and made the ultimate sacrifice to protect our freedoms and civil liberties. And today, what we see is an America that somehow, in some respects, has lost its way about protecting civil liberties and freedoms. And what we saw last week in New York with Donald Trump, not even knowing what his charge was, what he was convicted of, a trumped-up charge, forgive the pun, by a prosecutor who actually campaigned on getting Trump, as opposed to upholding the law and prosecuting a crime when a crime was committed. There's an old Russian saying that I'll show you. You tell me the person, I'll tell you the crime.
Right.
And in this case, we have that coming true in America. And it's, as a lawyer and somebody who's dealt with constitutional issues on behalf of many clients, last week was a sad, sad day and a sad, sad statement about how awry, how adrift that the legal process was when it came to protecting the defendant, like Donald Trump, as an example. There were people and organizations over the years that were, as a mission, was to protect our civil liberties and freedoms. And I ask them, where are they today? They're on the other side of the aisle, and so I guess principles are no longer rock bed anymore. They are based upon situational principles, and I think we've lost our way there. So, people who stand up for human rights and civil liberties and freedoms that are afforded by our Constitution, those things were afforded to those we like and those who we dislike, and it should be evenly done. In fact, criminal defense lawyers, which I'm not one, but criminal defense lawyers, are there to protect those who are most abhorrent to society, those who've committed the most heinous of crimes, murder and all kinds of things. But those folks, those defendants, are afforded certain things and certain protections under our Constitution. As much as we may not like the person, we appreciate the process and the protections that are afforded them. I believe that President Trump was not afforded those basic rights that we all deserve under the U.S. Constitution.
And I think as a result of that, they have trampled on the civil liberties and the rights of each one of us. I mean, Trump was the target. There's no doubt about that. But their agenda is to destroy the Constitution and break down the law, the rule of law in this country. You as an attorney, I as an individual, we've all in our lifetime at one point or another sworn allegiance to the United States. We've sworn allegiance, lifted our right hand and sworn to protect the Constitution of the United States from enemies, both foreign and domestic. And I feel that we have a core of domestic enemies going on right now in legal position because they've been elected into their positions, some of them mostly appointed by people who have no right to even be in office, but a great many people making decisions for this country that have never been voted into an office, but they have the power of the executive office behind them.
The idea that the United States and its constitutional protections that we're all afforded is the model for the world, took a real hit. And what we saw last week was akin to a banana republic, a third world country where political opponents are subjected to the power, the sheer power and might of the government, as opposed to being afforded the same rights and protections, regardless of your political views, regardless if you sit on the same side of the aisle of me or whether you sit exactly opposite of me. That was always a cornerstone of our republic. And frankly, we've lost some of that. And that some of that innocence about the legal system has taken a real hit. Now, I would say to you, Carl, I have a lot of confidence in this respect. The legal process, as misguided and heinous as it was about the way it was applied last week in New York, and all those things leading up to that trial still is in process, meaning that we still have an appeal. And there were, as a lawyer, you look at things and you say, okay, there's many things that there were error done by the trial court, and with a cooler, calmer, more considered viewpoint, I'm hoping and I have confidence that some higher court will rule and square away what we saw as a travesty of last week.
I don't doubt that at all. My concern is that they have targeted an individual who's a candidate for the presidency of the United States. And their objective, not only now, but over the last couple of years in preparation for this, their objective has been to discredit him and remove him because their candidate cannot compete against him. They probably will have some irregularities during the election as well. I've been doing some shows talking about somebody, I'm sure you know the name, George Soros, and his open society, and how he has supported so many fringe line people for billions of dollars gone into this effort to discredit the United States. And over the last few years, he has spent tens of millions of dollars getting district attorneys and judges elected into key positions in this country so that they could come together aligned. Judge should not be aligned with the district attorney. He should be standing as a paragon of balance and truth. But that's not what happened last week. That's not what was attempted in Atlanta. This is an attack on the American judicial system, just as the removal of certain items from the school systems and have been an attack on the family, the American family. And I think it's been, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I do believe, as you said, this country has lost a great deal of its strength, which comes with its values and its conformity and the reality that there are units of families and people who teach younger people how to be civil in this world. And that seems to be dissolving all around us.
Well, there's a bigger, I don't believe in coincidences, Carl. I see this as simply another play in the playbook in an attempt to diminish what I believe is the greatness of our country. We've come a long way from the inspirational words of Ronald Reagan about the shining city on a hill and American exceptionalism, that belief that there was something unique about America, which I believe, and many others, whether they were Republican, Democrat, at a time when you can have that debate about why we were so good. You don't overlook the foibles and mistakes and things that we've done in the past. You don't say that we're perfect. That's not the point. The point is that we are the best form of government, and we've far exceeded in making the lives of our citizens and been an example to the entire world. That's why people are clamoring to come here, and we've benefited from immigration over the years.
Absolutely.
And all of us, you and my family both, historically, came from another place and made a life here and added to the American dream. That dream, though, has to be based upon the tenets of the Constitution, individual freedoms that we enjoy here that you cannot enjoy in many other parts of the world. In fact, almost all other parts of the world. And the opportunity to rise above your station and to have your kid's life be that much better than yours. After all, that is a generational dream from one to the next, to have your children have more opportunity and succeed, given their talents, given their skills, to maximize their success, both financially and lifestyle and on a happiness scale. There's no greater country than this country. And for those who want to seek to destroy it is just absolutely wrong. And I think this is what happened last week was just one other thing that a certain element of the left, radical left, is trying to destroy what I consider the West, and the key player in the West is our country.
Absolutely agree. I saw something just this morning, a Navy SEAL symbol embedded over a pride flag. Now, where in consciousness would you ever think you'd see something like that?
What I found rather interesting, and it crystallizes where we may be with some of our younger people. The demonstrations were occurring at Columbia, pro-Hamas, pro-Palestine, anti-Israel, anti-West, and they totally, took over that campus for a period of time. Could you believe that could ever happen in New York City? But that said, they interviewed a student who was the president or the chair of the LBGT club at Columbia, and she was shouting pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas slogans. And it just says to me, doesn't she realize that if the folks that she is advocating for were in power, that she would be stoned to death?
She doesn't know that. Half of those children there have no knowledge about who they're supporting. That's why half of the demonstrators were really paid demonstrators from elsewhere. The student body themselves are ill-advised. They're not taught the realities of what really is. I'm having this ongoing debate with someone online who I know he was raised in a different fashion than he's speaking, but he's pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas, and every time he makes a statement, it's completely wrong. And I have to point out to him where it's wrong and where he can go find the truth. Because all he does is listen to hyperbole. He listens to propaganda and he takes it to be true. That's not truth.
But Carl, all that is almost reaffirmed by the current administration's position that leans and in fact supports Hamas and the underlying terrorist groups that committed the atrocities of October 7th, and then forsook our friend Israel, who is the sole democracy in that area. And so we would rather side with those who want to cause mischief in the Middle East, like Iran, and provide them with money and whatnot. And for what? To cause and to promote and ferment turmoil in the Middle East, and frankly, to basically turn our back on Israel. And I will say to you that used to be one of those topics that both Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives could all agree upon. And for some, there is, I want to say, a fringe group, but I was told over the last couple of weeks, I interviewed Congressman Waltz, who happens to be the congressman from Jacksonville. You may have seen him on Fox. He was a former military intelligence officer, and he has a lot of experience in the Middle East. And he basically said, Ed, sadly, the progressive caucus of the Democrats in the United States Congress today is not 4 or 6 squad members. It is 100 strong. And so when we talk about the fringe inside, the progressive fringe inside the Democratic Party, we're talking about nearly half of the elected Congress people elected who are Democrats in Congress sit in that progressive caucus.
Okay, I want to go back again. I don't want to call this a conspiracy theory, but I want to go back again to the tens of millions of dollars that's spent by the Soros organization to get these people elected, a common agenda working towards a world supremacy global unit that will discredit the United States and its sovereignty because it interferes with their goals, their worldwide goals. It's an interesting thing. I hear so many people take the side of Hamas and say that we don't realize that they are the ones that are being persecuted, the Palestinians. Well, if that's really true, why won't the Egyptians or the Jordanians or the Saudis take any of them in? They refuse to take them in because they recognize that that's a core of unrest that will destroy their own countries.
Right. The Palestinian segment of the population, what was Transjordan historically, tried to overthrow the king of Jordan. No one wants that in their country. Not the Egyptians, not the Jordanians, nobody.
But that's the overall plan, to call global distress. I mean, look at what happened 10 years ago with the Arab Spring. There was all this contrived type of things that were paid, agitated, that brought unrest to the Middle East, and it drove refugees into Europe that changed the culture of Europe forever. It changed the sovereignty of some nations. Look at Norway. Norway took in 1 million people. It so changed their culture. They now have 22% of their population is non-Norwegians, and they have the highest murder rate in Europe. Gangs are rampant. That doesn't come by accident. Those are things that are contrived.
Well, the question is to what end? And in order to have, as you've described, some sort of new world order, or where there's a unit government across the world, the one country that stands in its way is the United States. And so, in order to achieve that goal, the theory would go is that you have to bring down the leader of the current world, which is the United States. And what you do, and that's why I would say to you that I don't believe in coincidences. A couple of years back, there was excessive violence that was encouraged inside of our inner cities. There was this defund the police, essentially an attempt to break down civil society inside of our urban core. There was the increased international activity to ferment race tensions in the United States. There was a series of those things. There is a series of things that were conservative commentators and speakers could no longer go in some form to go speak at college campuses. Imagine that. I mean, imagine where, in colleges, you were supposed to be able to hear all views, and that is the essence of the First Amendment. You should be able to shout at the top of your lungs something that would make my blood boil, as long as you don't impinge upon, and you do it respectfully, and you do it within the scope and means that is set up for you. It doesn't mean you have the right to anarchy, but it does mean that I have to be able to listen to it. And if I get upset about what you say, you shouldn't be excluded because I get offended by what you say.
But that's the tried and true. That's the tried and true American phenomenon. That is what's existed here from the beginning. That's why people came here to escape repression in England initially, and then elsewhere in the world, because they came here to be free.
And that's why in the 1780s, when we had a constitutional convention, it wasn't a 2-day convention. It was weeks long, and they debated every issue. And don't get me wrong, they didn't get everything perfect, but they came out of there with a document that they could all support.
And they followed it up with the Federalist Papers that gave strength to the states so that the balance stayed in place. Very important.
Very important. But we tend to forget those things, and educationally, the opposition understood that the way to move the ball in America was through its educational systems, and most of the major universities have allowed themselves to be either bought off or compromised, and so the educational system does not provide an appropriate well-roundedness of all views, only one view.
And yet, we have a government that supplements all of those educational systems with huge grants, huge supplements, and regardless of what they do with it, they have tenured professors in there that openly communist, speaking against the United States. There should be some remedy to that. And the American people never voted for that. We never voted to send our money to support communist agitators in our higher education system. I mean, you're deeply involved with charter schools. You know the value of an independent school system separate from the control of the government. And I pray that expands even further, never gets diminished.
Well, and it goes back to the essence of school choice goes back to putting the power back into the hands of the individual parent to do what's best for their particular child, whether that's a traditional school or a charter school or parochial school. or a school that a homeschool, whatever they want to do. But it is up to the parent to make those choices and to have that impact. And it's not something that we as parents should ever cede to the government, that power, to give the government the power to exercise its will over our children.
I completely agree. That's why I've thought for a long time the approach to change in the United States has to begin with the average citizen getting involved on the local level. Run for your school board, run for your city council, get involved in what's happening in events that are near at hand that affect you and your children. Don't sit home and wait for someone else to do it.
Carl, the big thing here is to remember what our Constitution and our civil liberties, the basic form and the basic protections are around the individual. Individual civil liberties we must protect like those who protected it on Omaha Beach 80 years ago. And so we need to protect that. And that means that parents should have an opportunity for school choice. We should protect and guard against those who would impinge upon our viewpoints, because they simply disagree with our viewpoint. We should be open to, especially in universities, there should be an open forum. I don't mind if my children who are now past college, but when they're in college, to hear somebody who is a communist or a socialist, just as long as we also hear the other sets of views as well, so that they can consider it and have let creative and constructive thought go through. That's what should be developed. In the meantime, our groups that are there to protect civil liberties and freedoms cannot be partisan. In fact, they should stand up and say that what happened to Donald Trump is just flat out un-American. End of story. And it cannot happen, and it should not happen, and it needs to be rectified. And to some degree, President Trump was right. There'll be a vindication, hopefully, either through the appeals legal process, but even in November when and if he gets reelected. But I would also say to you this: the political reality, Carl, is that this is a magician's trick. And I'm going to say it this way. It's a look here, don't look here kind of thing. Don't look here, but look here. It's a sleight of hand. They want to tag Donald Trump as a felon because they cannot run on their ideas. And because their ideas fail miserably. When you look around the world on foreign affairs, you've had in the last, under the Biden administration, you've had the attack, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, which I don't believe would have happened if Trump was still president. You have the Middle East on fire. You have Iran taking liberties, attempting to poke Israel and engage in terrorist activities. You had Hamas commit atrocities on October 7th of elderly and young people and babies. And that was their 9/11. And we need to understand that was a 9/11 to Israel. And we need to understand that they need to have the right, and we need to stand behind them to defend their right to exist. That would not have happened.
We also have to remind America, and it doesn't come through the press because it's biased, but we have to remind America, just as you said, they had their 9/11. We had our 9/11. But look what happened in this country on 9/12. What happened on 9/12? Americans went crazy hanging the flag, recognizing that we have to stand together again. That's just what Israel is doing. They're standing together, even more need than we had. They're standing for their very survival. And if they don't eliminate Hamas completely, they'll only be doing it again in a year or two.
The idea that the Biden administration would yield to its left fringe and suggest that in some way ceasefire was in order until Israel was militarily and physically secure, then that's just flat out wrong. And so that used to be something that was a cornerstone of ours, but it's not anymore. It seemed to have gotten lost here. That said, they can, the left cannot run on the fact that uh, uh, people are better off today. Inflation is eating up people's savings, and those who are fortunate enough not to feel inflation in the same way as others, find that it may be an annoyance, but those who are middle income down feel inflation in a very big way. When you're spending $50, $60, $100 a week extra at the grocery store on things that are absolutely necessary, gasoline as an example, those things take a bigger bite out of what you have to spend. And then there's difficult choices that people simply do not understand how inflation ultimately eats away at people's ability to earn a living. And so you cannot have wage gains on top of inflation. It is almost impossible. And historically, it's inflation that destroys countries.
Yeah. And we look at an administration that says they're supposedly for the little guy. And yet inflation is affecting the little guy worse than anything else. And they bring in all these immigrants to take away jobs at the lowest levels. The pressure is on the minority.
And I think many areas of our community, minority communities, whether Hispanic or Black, African American, are now beginning to understand that the Democratic Party really does not stand with them. They simply use them as a tool to get reelected. When President Trump was president, it was the highest employment rate for African Americans. It was the highest employment rate for Hispanics, highest employment rate for women, the greatest business startups in the Black and Hispanic and women-owned businesses in the history of the United States. Those things cannot be forgotten because each of those statistics are somebody who has a job or had a well-paying job, who was able to start a business because at least there was an understanding and an attempt by the administration under Trump to pull the yoke off of individuals to succeed and take the yoke of government and move it aside so that people can start businesses, earn a living, and live their best life.
Very, very much what Ronald Reagan attempted to do, the same thing. He didn't believe in big government. He believed in individuals going out and making something of their lives.
And I hope President Trump talks about those things rather, and I think that's really important that he frames those things that are meaningful to voters who are trying to figure out what to make of this verdict and how it impacts them, who are paying attention. Carl, yes. There's a study that says that most Americans have about 6 to 7 minutes a day to spend on things that are external to their lives. And so politics falls in there somewhere. And so when you have such a small window, it's not people that we know that spend a lot of time on trying to understand this and trying to figure it out politically and where all this is going. Most people don't have the time nor the inclination to spend that much time. So they have a window to understand. And I hope that the messaging is really simple. Our economy was strong and our place in the world was strong. The world was not on fire under Trump. And frankly, our economy, particularly hard hitting on the middle income and beneath, is not performing as well as it can here in America because of inflation and because of government regulatory schemes that want to make you spend $20,000 more to buy an electric vehicle just because they feel good.
And you can't drive it anywhere.
And you can't drive it and you can't get it charged up. And so there's a whole set of issues. And by the way, all of those batteries come with components that can only be gotten through China. And so how silly are we? And so, we don't want to drill an American on American lands. So we have to buy from Venezuela. And when you say that in somebody in South Florida, particularly since we have a strong, expat community of Venezuelans here, They know what it means to have to buy from a dictator down in Venezuela.
So we have a president in his supreme intellect depletes the reserves, the fuel reserves, so just so that he can go buy gasoline at a higher price and dirty fuel to begin with.
And dirty fuel, so it actually operates the eye. You can't make this stuff up.
It's completely against his green move.
You can't make this stuff up.
No brains.
We've checked our common sense at the door. We need to go back and get it and make decisions that are best for our families. And I go back to this. We need to go focus on individuals and protecting their freedoms. When we do that, we're always in a good place.
Absolutely. And we didn't even get into the press, and we could be talking about that for another hour, I'm sure. So we're at 40 minutes, and I'm going to have to cut short now. But I would like to have you come back because I think we have a lot to say to each other and about things that are going on. But before we do, I want to tell the people who are watching today, one of the reasons you're enjoying this show so much is because this is a man who comes with a DNA of wisdom. Where did that DNA come from? That DNA came from a town in Italy that is famous, and you don't even know why it's famous. But I'm going to tell you, Sophia Loren came from the same town.
She's much better looking than me, Carl. That's for sure.
She's better looking than most of the world, man.
I tell you, some of it is because we were not afraid. I'll share a story. I was on the day before Thanksgiving. I was on Stuart Varney's show on Fox Business. And we're doing it. I forget what the interview was about at the time, but he asked me, he says, Ed, it's the day before Thanksgiving. We just had Tucker Carlson on right before you, and he's Presbyterian, and they don't really talk politics. They don't say a word. Everybody's polite with each other. What is Thanksgiving dinner table at your house like? I said, wow. I said, you need to know that when I was really, really young, no holds barred at the dinner table. We talked politics. We talked to everything. Now, not too many people listened around the table, but everybody was talking for sure.
So, and they will never understand that a Thanksgiving turkey doesn't taste good unless it's preceded by pasta. They don't know that.
My wife is Cuban, so on Christmas Eve we don't really do the 7 fishes anymore like Italians. We do we get a pig and we put it in the cajina box, the Chinese box, and we cook it up, and we have my family and hers over, and it makes for great conversation.
That's wonderful. I have to send you a link. My wife and I did a joke show called The Italian Feast of the 7 Fishes. And it was a joke from beginning to end. You'll love it. I'll send you the link.
That'd be great.
So Ed, we have to wrap up. Anything last minute you'd like to tell the folks before we close?
I just think that it's up to us. And I would take inspiration from today's anniversary of the 80th day of D-Day. And what that was about was protecting our freedoms and our individual rights. And I would suggest that people engage in the civil activities, civil discourse, and ensure and protect themselves from having their rights diminished. And November is just around the corner, and there's nothing wrong with putting our country first. We are the leader of the world, and we'd like to stay there. We have been, frankly, on the right side of most of the history, especially in World War II, and we certainly don't want to give back what our country has enjoyed by way of freedoms. All the foibles in the world that we've committed, all the mistakes that we've made in the past, we're here to try to create a more perfect union, and we should all participate in that.
Completely agree. So, ladies and gentlemen, you know what that means. You not only have to get out and vote, you have to talk to everyone you know and tell them that if they haven't voted in years, or if they're on the fence, it's time to get off that fence. Make sure that you're ready and able to vote correctly, because the world needs it. The United States needs it for sure. But if the United States is not strong, the world is weakened in a much more desperate way than we can even imagine. So thank you all for joining us today. And I want to remind you what I tell you every time. You have your own story. Everybody has their own story, but no one can tell it like you do. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your children, because when it's too late, and all that wisdom is gone. Tell everyone you know about the truths that you have learned in life. And I'm this big guy from Brooklyn, just like it is. I tell you what I tell you every week. Get somebody you know, give them a big bear hug, and tell them you love them. It may be the only time they hear those words, and I'm quite sure God does too. Tell them you love them. I love you, Eddie.
Thank you, Carl. Love you too.
Come back anytime.
Thank you.
And you know what? We're going to do it over a meal, I know.
That sounds good. Sounds good.
Bye-bye, all.